Good morning. My name is Victor Jack. I'm a reporter covering energy in Europe, and you are watching Politico Live, the live extension of our journalism. The EU has emerged from the worst phase of an unprecedented energy crisis that shook the bloc last year. Gas and power prices soared more than tenfold in some countries amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine, hammering consumers and businesses. With politicians under extreme pressure to bring prices down in what at times has become a fraught and tense debate, the Commission has delivered a targeted reform of its wholesale power market in record time. The highly political proposal, it argues, will boost investment in renewables, increase EU competitiveness in the face of stiff competition from the US and China, and above all, ease bills for consumers. The event comes at a great time, just 1 week after the proposal was first presented and before the EU legislative machine kicks into gear, with many fights to come between countries and the Parliament as they race to finalise a deal, and fears of another energy crisis are never far away. We will be discussing this and more with our panellists, but first we have some housekeeping. I would like to thank our sponsor Ørsted for making this event possible and thank our audience for joining us online. We would like to make this event as interactive as possible. You can participate by tweeting about it at @LivePolitico and asking questions through the Slido app using #PowerMarketInnovation. You know who we are, so I will be prioritizing questions that are sent with a name and organization so that it's transparent for our viewers and panelists. Before we get started, we'll now hear some opening remarks from our partner Ulrik Stridbeck, Vice President and Head of Regulatory and Public Affairs at Ørsted.
Thank you very much, Victor. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you well.
Yes. Thank you very much, Politico, for setting this up. The reason why we are partnering in Ørsted with Politico around this is that we would like to contribute to the debate about this extremely important topic. And it's a great pleasure to take part in this conversation with the exact right representatives from policymakers, the Commission, the European Parliament, and industry and academia. My introduction, I would like to start by saying that as Victor also said, we have been led into this conversation through a horrible crisis initiated largely by the war, but also other factors squeezing supply. And one of the effects was that the power markets, energy markets, but particularly power markets, were in turmoil through last year. With very high prices and a lot of volatility. And number one, I would like to say that the power market that we have developed in Europe over the last 20 years to reflect the price, the cost of electricity, well, largely it served its purpose. There was a tightness of supply, and that was reflected effectively, but also very painfully. So number one message from me is that we should not shoot the messenger. It largely worked in sending those signals. First of all, sending the signal that we need more power generation in the system. We need more renewable energy. We need investments. And a fear of ours, being an investor in renewable energy, was that the debate would undermine or bring in doubt how the power market is serving to send these signals to create an investment framework for us. And with the proposal that the Commission, Katarina, has come out with, we are not shooting the messenger. So that is very good. We are rather giving the messenger a clean shower, a clean set of clothes, and making the power market ready for the next hilly phase. So a very good way of starting this conversation with. We think it's a good proposal. It reinforces incentives for investing in renewable energy and in infrastructure. And, uh, and here I would first highlight particularly that the incentives for investing in renewable energy has been reinforced with this proposal by strengthening the role of long-term contracting. That is also a way of, if you will, put it that way, of decoupling power prices from natural gas. It is by having producers and consumers agreeing on average prices. So very, very good. Also very, very good in that regard that there is no forced hand. There is still a host of opportunity for governments to offer contracts for difference if that is what is needed, but also for businesses to agree among each other on corporate PPAs. So very, very good. Moving on then to the infrastructure part. Also here, we do need very, very clear incentives for investments, but by the way, also for renewable energy, permitting approvals are probably the biggest bottleneck. But on infrastructure, two, in our view, very, very positive proposals in here. They are quite detailed, but part of the clean clothes for making us ready for the next stretch. Number one is that certainly in Ørsted, we have a lot of focus and belief in the role of offshore wind to decarbonize European electricity supply going forward. And here to make sure that offshore wind is traded in a good way, in an effective way, and that everyone is left with the correct incentives. And here the Commission is proposing new arrangements to ensure a better relationship between the offshore wind generator and the TSOs through transmission access guarantees. A very, very positive proposal. And secondly, in our view, also a huge opportunity that we need to cater for is that if we can allow renewable energy and the big offtake, for example, from hydrogen to co-locate, we may be able to save some of the transmission investment. And here the proposal is suggesting that anticipatory investments, tariffs, all of that must come together in a good way to ensure that these incentives are protected. And finally, of course, the importance of effective markets to trade flexibility, to trade, to manage volatility in the systems is extremely important. And also the proposal, in our view, is underlining that and taking us into the future on that account as well. So those are our key messages I would like to introduce with, and I'm looking very much forward to continue the conversation here now, but also in the half year to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. So joining us today are Manuel Garcia, Director General at the Directorate General for Energy Policies and Mines at the Ministry of Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge in Spain. We have Leonardo Meus, Professor at the European University Institute and Director at the Florence School of Regulation. We have MEP Morten Helveg Petersen, a Danish lawmaker from Renew Europe and Vice Chair of the Parliament's Industry Committee. We have Katarina Sikov Magni, Director at the Green Transition and Energy System Integration Unit in DG Energy in the European Commission. And we'll see some participation from Nicola Rega later on, the Executive Director for Climate Change and Energy at CEFIC. So we've got a lot of ground to cover today, as Ulrich has highlighted. But I'd like to roughly structure the discussion into three sections: the problems kind of with the market so far, the proposal and what it does to address those issues, and then what are some next steps that will follow on from here. So I'd like to start with Katarina. Last year, in the midst of the energy crisis, it looked like we were heading for a pretty radical reform, with calls to replace the merit order and Commission President Ursula von der Leyen promising in September a deep and comprehensive reform of the electricity market that she said was no longer fit for purpose. While the reform does touch on some more structural elements, it's much more slimmed down and doesn't propose a radically different model. So what changed?
Thank you. So what has changed? Well, first of all, if we look at what was the situation last autumn we had a situation where many European member states did not receive any gas, obviously from Russia because of the war. We had a very dry year and lacked hydropower in Iberian Peninsula, in Norway, among others. And then obviously we also lacked half of French nuclear reactors. So we were in a crisis situation because of the war, and we were in a scarcity situation in the electricity sector. Prices hit the roof. Our industry suffered, our consumers suffered, and we needed to find solutions. Commission proposed a number of crisis measures under the so-called Article 122 of the EU Treaty, and at the same time announced that we would come up with a structural reform of the electricity market. And that's what we've now done. We have consulted stakeholders to seek all advice we could get from all experts in the EU and beyond. And what we have then proposed a couple of weeks ago is an evolution on what we have. So not a radical revolution, which would take a lot of time to implement, a lot of time to design all the details. And therefore, what we have proposed is an evolution, keeping what works well, short-term market, but complementing it on areas where it did not work so well, meaning long-term markets, consumer protection, flexibility, and investment signals for decarbonized energy production. So we have proposed a very impactful review of the market design, which on top of it can be implemented rapidly, because that's what we need, rapid implementation at the same time.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Absolutely, and many thanks for that. I want to ask a fairly similar question now to Manuel. I'd like to bring you in. I mean, looking at Spain for a second, Madrid has in the past week pitched the kind of reform and the proposal as a kind of win for Madrid and other countries who have pushed for a more interventionist approach. But your energy minister, Teresa Ribera, has said in the past that, a far more radical overhaul, like propositions, for example, a Greek proposal that would split the market last year, could offer a good blueprint for reform. So in that sense, what kind of changed for you there?
Thank you, Victor. Good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you to Politico for inviting us, and it's a pleasure to be here among the rest of the speakers. Well, I think that it's important to put where we are into perspective. Less than 1 year ago, nobody believed that we could be today talking about a concrete proposal for the reform of the electricity market. It was like a taboo speaking about reforming the electricity market. It was a very difficult topic to put on the table. And I think that for Spain, for us, it is very important what we have advanced in the last year. We have reached a lot of consensus among member states, stakeholders, and civil society. I think that now it's a very positive outcome of this process. We have reached a consensus among about the diagnosis of the situation. I think that we all can agree on that the short-term day-ahead markets are good, they work well, and they need to be strengthened in the sense that we need a robust price signal for the short term. We also can agree, I think, that we have to put consumers at the center of this energy transition and the market reform, and this is very important. And I think also there is consensus regarding the fact that we lack liquidity in the forward markets, and we have to act on that in order to attract investments and to bring to today the benefits of the energy transition. So Spain has been leading these discussions from the very beginning, because probably in Spain we were more exposed than in other member states the weaknesses of the design of the market because of our special conditions, even physical geographical conditions. We are less interconnected. We probably had an even less liquid forward markets, and our consumers first suffered the price spikes, and this is why the political social debate in Spain began earlier than in other member states. But now we are here. We appreciate the efforts made by the European Commission. We welcome the proposal. We believe that it is a good proposal. It goes in the right direction. We are not proposing radical, innovative, imaginative solutions that nobody knows what other side effects could have. We believe that we should work on what we have, improving and developing new aspects that are new and required for the energy transition. So this is why we assess the proposal in a positive way, but nevertheless, we also consider that some aspects need to be improved. We need more ambition in some specific aspects, and I will be very happy to elaborate on that later on. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thanks for that. Yeah, we'll get onto that in a little bit. But I mean, Morten, first, I want to come to you. I mean, we've had a whole raft of emergency measures, and I think as Ulrich was kind of pointing out, to a certain degree, some of these slightly patchy emergency measures have gone some way to spook kind of investors in renewables. And Parliament has largely been excluded so far from many of these discussions as the Commission relied very heavily on some of its emergency powers. Was there a sense of frustration there at having a limited voice at the end of last year? And in retrospect, would the Parliament have maybe done something differently in introducing these measures, such as revenue caps, if it had had a greater voice?
Well, that is obviously difficult to speculate in, but clearly, I mean, Parliament wants to get involved, and I also think that with fully accepting and understanding the need for emergency measures, given the need for speed in this, things like this needs to be rooted or grounded also in political decisions. So I think that there's definitely an argument for Parliament to get involved, and obviously this is what is ahead of us now. And the remainder of the year will be extremely busy and difficult, not least trying to come to terms with this proposal and negotiate it, given that there are really big and serious discussions in this between countries in council and between political groups in Parliament. So this is, I mean, this is not going to be easy, and the devil will be in the detail, obviously. I had the privilege of negotiating the market design last mandate also, and I mean, as we all know, these are highly technical issues, and devil will be in the detail in all this. So we have a lot of work to do, a lot of ground to cover. Now, I think there are so many good things in this proposal. I think one thing is all the stuff that's in there that is good and positive, and on the other side, I'm also happy to see that this is not a fundamental break with the merit order system, because I think it's important to acknowledge and appreciate that the current model in many ways have served us well in terms of integration of renewables, in terms of introducing price signals and having these price signals determine what kind of production is actually taking place. So let's be very much aware of, in the midst of a crisis, that we do not do structural reforms or initiatives that would actually hamper what it is that we want to do, namely the further uptake and integration of renewables in our energy system. This is at least what I'll be very much focused on when we get down to negotiating this proposal in details.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to bring in Leonardo here from a kind of more academic perspective. Some of these emergency measures that were, hurriedly sort of rolled out last year, beyond what Ulrich was saying, kind of, do you see any sort of downsides there? And does the proposal kind of address some of these issues to you?
Yes, I think I'm fully in line with the previous speaker that I think this proposal is really a good balance between, doing a significant reform, but as you said, Victor, it was done in a record time, so it can also, not do more. and then, some people were saying we have to completely overhaul. And I think we as academics, we've always been critical, right? That the electricity market is not perfect. We see a lot of small imperfections to improve, but the big picture of this market is very, very positive. So I think academics like me have sort of paused talking about these small imperfections and have been mainly defending the market. And we were then indeed a bit worried that some of these emergency measures, could do long-term harm. And that's why I think it was good to have a proposal that calmed things down and that can maybe replace some of these emergency measures and give the stability that we need, right? Because I agree with the opening comments that we need a lot of investment, and to get investment, we need some stability and a clear framework in which this can be done. And the proposal hits on a lot of these imperfections or incompleteness of the market. And I guess we will go into some of these points later on. But for instance, there wasn't insufficient hedging by consumers and retailers that needed to be addressed. There were some difficulties of consumers to access cheap renewables that have also been addressed. And then there was this investment uncertainty, right, that needed to be addressed. And I think the proposal contains all these elements. And then, of course, now we need to make sure that all of that is implemented properly. And there is also a big role to play at a national level to make sure that this implementation is done properly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, thanks for that. And as Ulrich was saying, there's been some fear from investors. I think with the revenue cap, especially, I think the kind of criticism from more industrial players was that member states got flexibility to implement revenue caps at different levels, which created this sort of patchy system, and that sort of sparked some concerns and put some projects on hold. And hearing some of these thoughts from Leonardo as well, Katerina, I'd like to just bring you in before we move on quickly. I mean, given these thoughts, the deadline is kind of coming up to extend some of these emergency measures in late June. Can you rule out that the Commission will extend these measures for a longer period?
Thanks. I mean, we are currently in the process of assessing whether to extend or not, and that decision will be taken in due course. So I cannot anticipate it, but what I can say here now is that if you look at the measures now in electricity, so what we had, revenue cap and the demand reduction, etc. So by looking at the market design proposal, you will see that we have foreseen there the possibility for member states in a well-defined crisis situation to use regulated retail tariffs to protect their consumers, households, and SMEs. So that is an element we have brought from the crisis measure into the market design proposal. We have also created there a tool, which is a peak shaving tool, whereby the TSO would put this in place in order to mitigate the peaks when the prices typically then go very high. So this is not the 5% peak reduction measure, but it is a structural measure to impact on the peak price and by reducing the peak demand there. So if you look at what we have brought into the structural proposal as structural measures, you could perhaps see that in our view, in the longer term, therefore, these measures, together with the PPAs and the contract for difference, by the way, will do that is needed for the long-term market. And therefore, we are really critically looking at the Article 122 proposal on whether it needs to be extended or not. Decision will be taken soon.
Great. Thanks for that. But and just to be clear, so you're not saying that it will happen, but you're not ruling it out either. Is that right?
Until a decision has been taken, I think nothing can be ruled out.
Great. And I'm glad you mentioned consumer bills. That leads us very sort of smoothly on to our next topic. Before we move on, I'd just like to remind our audience that you can participate by sending in your questions on Slido. So I want to talk about the proposal now itself. Core element, as Katarina just highlighted, is very much easing prices for consumers. I'd like to bring you in again, Leonardo, here. I mean, what do you see impact on consumers as being here with this proposal? Will this really bring down the price of our utility bills? And how quickly can it do this?
So I think the proposal, as was mentioned, encourages a bit more long-term contracting for new assets. And I think we as academics also very much welcome that this can be a combination of more government-backed contracting, these so-called CFDs, but also still leaves rooms for private initiatives, like more industrial consumers that can maybe sign these contracts directly with developers. So that's all very good. But then you might say, okay, but all these contracts take a while, right? And new assets take a while to be built. So if there are fits in these contracts, that won't happen immediately in the next few summers. And that I concur with what Katarina said. It's good that some of these emergency measures that are maybe important for the next few winters are picked up in this proposal, like this concept of block tariffs. It's not mentioned specifically, but it's described in that way, which I think indeed is a very good mix of protecting consumers for 70 or 80% of their consumption, and then to still expose them to market prices for the rest. But yeah, that requires public money, right? But maybe that's why we have a combination of, making sure we invest and have longer term contracts for the midterm, let's say, and then in the short term, we have a kind of European framework now for some of these emergency measures, if in case we still need them now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this proposal is interesting because we kind of have a rare constellation where broadly sort of consumer groups, NGOs and industry seem to be broadly happy with kind of all parts of it. But I want to bring you in, Morten, here. I'm hearing from some consumer groups saying that, they are broadly happy, but the proposal doesn't do enough on making sure contract renewals happen with consumers' explicit consent, nor does it kind of protect consumers from aggressive marketing practices. Should the European Parliament add these and perhaps other provisions later on in the legislative process?
Well, we might. I mean, that is for sure one of the many discussions we'll be having on this, whether the consumer side of it is sufficiently addressed, and if not, then what to put in there. But if I can come back to the point made just before, I think it's important in this phase that we are perhaps even more clear about what is the purpose of this reform, because in any case, we are not going to solve issues or problems for the upcoming winter. This is where the emergency measures might be appropriate. But I think it's an important task ahead of us, for all of us, to address, okay, so what are the short-term implications? What needs to be done for the upcoming winter, given the spiking energy prices, given the sensitivities out there, and what is meant to be structural and in the long term? Because some of the issues addressed in the proposal are obviously long term in terms of facilitating further uptake of renewables, which I think and assume we would all agree in. But so let's be very clear, what is it we're trying to address? What kind of problems are we trying to solve with this proposal? And if we're not able to solve these problems in the short term, then of course these emergency measures might be appropriate and relevant. So let's make sure that we discuss and address what is at the core of this. What is it? What kind of problems are we trying to solve with this? And for sure, the consumer side of this will be important, will be relevant, and for sure this is going to be very central in discussions also in the very near term.
Great. And I want to move on now to the sort of heart of the proposal, or at least, how it's been covered at least, which is the expansion in the use of state-led two-way contracts between energy firms and governments called contracts for difference, or CFDs. So when new investments rely on public subsidies, they'll have to rely on CFDs. 7 member states have previously advocated for these to be strictly voluntary. So Katarina, can you tell us, why did you decide to make them mandatory here in some cases?
Thanks. First, I want to underline that indeed, when we speak about contract for difference, we are speaking about investments that require public support. So they are all then in compliance with the state aid rules, and there is a necessity for the public support. The PPAs and then purely merchant projects will still continue to be the large part of the market. But on contract for difference, so the reason why we made it mandatory is that today a lot of support to renewables is provided, or some of it already as a contract for difference, but some of it as support on top of the market prices as a premium. And what we saw is that many of these support schemes today only made the price increases worse. And that's why we then consider that, because the aim is to limit the volatility of the prices so that the consumers can benefit from increased amount of renewables, that therefore the contract for difference then for publicly supported investments in renewables and in nuclear shall be made contract for difference in a form where when the market price goes very high, the government recuperates the amount beyond the strike price, and this is then channeled back to all consumers. And then the other side, which is the investment certainty side, is obviously that when market prices one day go back to very low levels as they were a couple of years ago, then again the investor can be sure to get their money back. So that's the reasoning behind.
Absolutely, yeah. And bringing you back in briefly here, Morten, kind of to respond to that. I mean, as someone from, the Liberal group Renew and a Dane, a country that's pushed hard for a much lighter touch reform, do you see any downsides here of imposing mandatory CFDs for new investments, a large chunk of which, will be covered by these CFDs?
So again, devil's going to be in the detail in all this, and clearly the fundamental, ideological principle discussion, political discussion we'll be having is basically how hard do you want to intervene in markets? To which extent would you rely upon markets, and to which extent do you want to regulate further? So I'm almost tempted to say, I mean, this will be Karl Marx battling Adam Smith in the next year, so to speak. How granular do you want to be in the choice of instruments, and coming back to the state aid issue? And clearly, on some of these issues, further guidance will be needed on CFDs from Commission. And we need to ensure that we have an overview of the state aid issue and the state aid questions, because this should not be like an open party for countries and member states just to spend money lavishly on CFDs. So I'm just again coming back to the basic point. This model, market-based model, have served us well in so many ways, and this proposal should not be seen as a way of ignoring the fundamentals and using CFDs, PPAs, and the opportunities in there to further pump a lot of state aid into the system. This we have to at least address and be mindful of in the upcoming negotiations.
Great. And I'd like to bring Manuel in here for a second, because I mean, you kind of, Spain has had traditionally quite a different view to that. In fact, you've previously advocating for also imposing CFDs on some existing generators too, namely nuclear plants and hydropower. Can you explain a little bit why you're sort of pushing for that? And were you disappointed that these weren't included?
Thank you, Victor. Yes, actually, this is one of the points, aspects that where we believe that we should be more ambitious. It has to do with equity, with redistribution, the benefits of the energy transition, and also has to do with protecting consumers. This type of installations, these legacy plants, nuclear, hydro, big hydro in Spain, which are non-contestable in the sense that they will not. There is no possibility to build further capacity in these technologies. We believe that during this transition there will be many moments where they will get excessive profits, and the benefits will be exposed to these high prices. And the way the proposal by the Commission tries to address this problem of protecting consumers is through these regulated tariffs, which, by the way, are only meant to be for households and SME companies, which means that it will be the fiscal policy, the budgetary capacity, the size of the pocket of each member state that will determine the level of protection for the consumers. And at the same time, the taxpayers would be financing or paying for these windfall profits for these technologies. This is why Spain has proposed, and will continue to do, to act on these technologies, which were built many years ago, and which, of course, will be benefiting for the coming years from these episodes of high prices, high volatility, and this is why Spain is advocating for this intervention on these plants.
I mean, Katerina, so you kind of disagree clearly with some of this. I want to come to you. Kind of why didn't you include some of these elements in the proposal?
Well, when it comes to existing production fleet, and if we think about renewables, they do have their support schemes with the government. Typically, if they are supported, and regulating the existing fleet, I mean, they have different type of contracts already, be it with the private sector or others. In our assessment, would have been retroactively affecting already existing contractual relations with the public sector or with the private sector. And that for renewables, for instance, is something which is not allowed according to the Renewables Directive. And we wanted to keep that in force. So that's mostly the reason that there are contractual relations already in place, and retroactivity was not seen as a positive way. And especially for investment certainty, if investors cannot be sure that the contracts they have signed will be respected, we could see a lot of investors who would not invest in the decarbonization that we urgently need.
Great. And I'm just going to bring Nicola Rega in about the 30 seconds or a minute or so. I just wanted, to give a bit of context. I mean, the EU is facing stiff competition from the US and China at the moment, with America's, almost $370 billion climate subsidies package, the Inflation Reducing Act. And this has kind of led to some investors considering moving to the US. And on the other hand, we have, China coming in as a competitor as well. We have, cheap Chinese state-backed loans, which are already leading to, wind project auctions in some countries like Croatia already being won by Beijing. So looking at this context, energy-intensive businesses have been hit especially hard by the energy crisis, including metals and chemicals. I mean, in your view, Nicola, I just wanted to essentially ask from your point of view, I mean, does this proposal go far enough in addressing this issue and persuading you that, it's worthwhile for you to stay in the EU?
Good morning. Thanks also for the opportunity to speak at this very relevant and timely event. Clearly, you mentioned one of the main challenges that we are facing at the moment, and that is beyond the usual international competition that we are facing. There's also now additional forces coming from the main competing economies, and that comes at a time when we are going through an energy crisis, and even though the absolute peaks have been passed, we are still, in relative terms, experiencing much higher price compared with our competitors. So we are in a situation of current competitiveness, plus on top of that also, we are at a time when we need to step up our investments towards the 2030 targets and looking beyond in a way to meet the 2050 climate neutrality objective. So the timing is quite crucial, and clearly this is a proposal that comes, I would say, at the right time. we like to see how will be implemented and what happens in the meantime, and what kind of support measures can be still envisaged by the time this proposal reveals the positive elements. Now, this being said, we don't know yet exactly, and that's a bit of the question mark we have, what will be the final impact of these measures on price formation leading to lower electricity prices. We've been discussing about several issues so far. Certainly, the change of narrative on long-term contracts is something which is absolutely positive. It is, I would say, the result of 20 years of trying to change a narrative that was going in the opposite direction. So that is positive. At the same time, signing long-term contracts at a time of high electricity prices is not probably the wisest thing that companies would be looking at the moment. And so we need to see also what are the implications in moving forward. And there is a lot of uncertainty, if I could put it nicely, in Quo Vadis electricity prices in moving forward. I think we'll have we need to have some clarity in terms of expected averages of electricity prices. That would be then the basis for long-term contracts. There are a lot of question marks. You've been highlighting some of them in this two-way contract for difference. It is still a bit unclear to us to what extent this is a de-risking tool that would lead to lower electricity prices, or a risk to be another risk of rushing to subsidies from investors. And then we have we've seen different ways of subsidies rush over the past decade or so. So the question is again, how attractive will be this contract for difference for investors vis-a-vis, for instance, signing PPAs, long-term contract with industry? How much these two tools will be in practice complementary, and to what extent maybe contract for difference would be more attractive than engaging with industry. Also, how revenues will be distributed. Contract for difference don't have an immediate impact on electricity prices. So if prices spike, we will be exposed to these high prices. And then we need to see if, when, and how governments are prepared to support industry backwards. So these are things that will have to be carefully, as has been mentioned by other speakers. The details will make a difference, and we are prepared to engage in discussing all these details with all policymakers.
Great. Thanks for that, Nicola. And I mean, I'd like to bring Morten in actually to respond to that. I mean, the Parliament will now take on the reins of the proposal. What should be added into the proposal to help energy-intensive businesses and persuade them that it's worth staying in the EU?
I mean, electricity market design and reform of this is obviously a key thing in this. And may I add that I think this, say, investors' perspective on this is extremely important in ensuring stability and predictability. So this is, in my opinion, key that we aim to provide this for all the investors that are tripping out there in order to invest millions or billions of euros in ramping up, be it offshore or onshore, what have you, what kind of renewables right now. So these price signals and ensuring ensuring stability and predictability is one thing. Now, adding to this, and touching upon what you're referring to, Victor, clearly with the Net Zero Industrial Act and the raw materials proposal as well, I'd say at large European Commission and thereby Parliament is trying to address this issue, hopefully and preferably in a somewhat holistic way, because investment decisions are being made out there in Europe these weeks, these months, where the IRA and what the Americans are doing, not least in terms of their tax breaks, are really something to be taken seriously. So I think the hope and the aim, and at least for me and my group and colleagues in Parliament, would be to ensure that we have at least strive to have a somewhat holistic view in this, with all these various legal acts that are on the table now. So it's going to be a very hectic and dramatic phase the next 6-12 months in all this.
Great, great. I'd like to just take maybe one or two questions before we move on to our final topic. So we have one question here from Michael Miesanski from Transnet BW, who asks, I think to you, Katarina, isn't there an inherent risk that CFDs will reduce liquidity in forward markets or PPAs? Is there a default design option for CFDs that could reduce that risk?
Thanks. I think I underline again that the CFD will not be the tool to get the investments done that we want to see. Contract for difference is only there when public support is needed and justified. We will have the forward markets where we are proposing to bring more liquidity through various tools, including virtual hub creation on a regional basis. The PPAs will also bring private players, private actors, more of those to the market for privately investing in renewables. So what is the key element here is the right balance between the different tools. And I think the right balance differs also from country to country. So there is no silver bullet in this respect. And by a combination of the three, whereby contract for difference, public support is the sort of last resort tool, I'm sure that the liquidity is not dried up, but on the contrary, can be increased with the proposals we have for the forward markets and for the PPAs.
Great, great. We also have a question here from Elizabeth Cremona at Amber, and I think Leonardo might be well placed to answer this. The consultation document had noted the objective of increasing electrification. In your view, does the Commission's proposal sufficiently address this? And if so, kind of through which measures?
Well, I think that brings us to that infrastructure dimension, right? So to the extent that we will have an acceleration of electrification due to this crisis, which I think will at least be partly the case, right? Then indeed, we should not only be concerned about making sure we have the right market rules in place, but we should also make sure that we have enough infrastructure in place. And there, I think it is true that all transmission and distribution network plans need to be updated in this new reality we are in, right? With these new ambitions we have to reduce our dependence on Russian gas. And I think also it's not only about electrification, it's really about looking more holistically at our network infrastructure and to see to what extent there are interactions, because that's, I think, what we've seen in this crisis as well, that there are really strong interactions if something happens in the gas system to the electricity system and vice versa. And in the future, we will also have clean molecule networks. So I think on the infrastructure, and we really have a lot of work to do still. Yeah, so and I think everybody's aware of that. But of course, this proposal was mainly a market reform proposal, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks for that, Leonardo. So now I want to move on to a final theme, which is sort of next steps, looking a bit at the politics, the follow-up, and the timeline. I'm going to do a bit of a quick fire round as we're running short on time. So I'm going to ask our participants to keep their responses to about a minute or so maximum, if possible. Katarina, I want to start with you. I mean, in the latest draft of the conclusions of the European Council, the Leaders' Summit coming up this week, we've seen that leaders say they want the reform done by the end of 2023. I mean, is there any chance the reform will be wrapped up in time and help consumers for this winter?
Thanks. I mean, first, if I look at the first reactions we have heard from the Council or from stakeholders more broadly from the Parliament, I would actually say that there is more convergence in views than not. So I think that is already a sign that a rapid conclusion could be achieved between the European Parliament and the Council there. On the Council side, the Swedish presidency is putting a lot of effort in the file and is ready to have a Council general approach by the end of their presidency. So therefore, and we also trust that the Parliament will work as rapidly as possible. So we are on our side quite optimistic that a conclusion of the negotiations in this year could be achieved, and Commission obviously stands ready to facilitate the discussions, provide any technical input on this. But I think the clear sign that the stakeholders from the public consultation, first reactions from member states are positive overall and converging on a large number of issues. Obviously, every member state has their own points they want to bring to the table, but I don't personally see this as preventing having a rapid conclusion of the negotiations.
Great, thank you. And Morten, I just want to bring you in very, very quickly on this as well. I mean, what's the mood in the European Parliament around this? Do you feel that that's too short a window for you to properly scrutinise the proposal and make sure that all stakeholders are represented for that? Or is it doable by the end of this year?
Well, I hope so. And personally, I would like to move fast on this in order to ensure stability and predictability for investors out there. But I also have to be very frank that there's a lot of sensitivity on this issue as well as other energy-related issues. Bear in mind that I believe we have like 7 elections all over Europe this year, and in each and every election, cost of living, prices of energy, what have you, are front and center of policy discussions. So, I mean, these are sensitive and hectic times. I'd like to move fast, but it's not a given that there are really real disagreements on scope and content of this proposal as well.
Great. And just quickly before we sum up, I'd like to touch on a very small but important topic of capacity mechanisms. So some industry players have said that it was a missed opportunity not to include a reform of capacity mechanisms within this proposal. Leonardo, I want to bring you in here just for 45 seconds or so. Could you briefly explain what these are to our audience and why they're important for decarbonization?
Well, they were controversial, right? So in the clean energy package, we sort of converged in the current legal framework to saying, yes, we allow member states to give some additional investment incentives to make sure they have enough capacity beyond these short-term price signals. But we were always worried that it would be used as a kind of state aid for maybe even dirty power plants. So that's why the framework sort of limits the abuse of member states and doesn't really encourage the use of them. In our policy brief, we had argued that maybe the lesson learned from this crisis is that now we are in a new world where maybe these kind of mechanisms could play a bigger role, and then it would be important to harmonize them more at European level. That has been partly picked up by this proposal, because if we would do a kind of new version of these mechanisms and make sure that they play a bigger role in encouraging the investment in storage, demand response, all kind of flexibility we need in the future. So the proposal does mention that countries that have a mechanism should then, try to include these more future-proof solutions in these mechanisms, or they could have a direct support for flexibility. So it does suggest that we're going towards a future where this kind of mechanism play a bigger role, but I fully understand, and in this record time, it was not possible to come already with a harmonized framework. So I do not know if that then is maybe something we might do in the next reform. But at least we already give some tools to member states in the meantime to do something about the current investment uncertainty.
Absolutely. And Katarina, just quickly, I mean, given that for the moment, the current capacity mechanisms allow and perhaps even incentivize investment into certain types of gas plants, which, most analysts would say is the root cause of the current energy crisis. Why didn't you include a more thorough reform of capacity mechanisms?
We did assess, obviously, on whether the capacity mechanisms as they are today deliver what they are expected to deliver, meaning security, supply and adequacy. And our assessment was that it does deliver. It plays an important role in ensuring a level playing field, and also that there is a real necessity for government intervention in the markets. However, we have also heard from member states that they perceive the process as a very complex, and we are committed to work with member states and with stakeholders to make the process to determine whether there is an adequacy need and whether then a capacity mechanism is needed, make that more streamlined and so that it can deliver more rapidly. So we believe that the capacity mechanisms as they are in the law are fine, but the implementation can be streamlined, and we are committed to do that.
Great, great. And I want to bring in both Morten and Manuel here for maybe 30 seconds each. Can you just tell me, should a reform of capacity mechanisms be included at a later stage within this proposal?
Well, that is a good question, and I don't have any final answer to this because obviously from Parliament's side, we'll be very, very soon diving into this and starting the negotiations, and we discussed consumer-related issues previously. I'm gonna bring back this issue of stability, predictability, and to which extent capacity mechanisms play into this. For sure, this will be relevant in the discussion, but it's too early for me to say whether this will be included in the negotiations.
And Manuel?
Yep. Yeah, thank you. From my side, the answer is yes. They should be introduced in the reform. We believe that the market should transition from only energy market to an energy plus capacity market, both short-term and long-term markets. We need capacity and flexibility. This is positive that the proposal includes this flexibility provisions, but we need a more simple and less cumbersome procedure in order to create these capacity markets, because the process right now is too complex, and this is a very important part of the reform because it is key, pivotal for the security of supply and for the attraction of the investments that we need for the decarbonization.
Great, great. And I want to do something a little bit controversial now. I want to just go around the room and ask you to just give me a yes or no question, just one word. Since capacity mechanisms, were not included, and they are, perhaps as vital as we say for decarbonization, and we have a short time frame to start reforming them, and that perhaps, as industry say, there are some missing elements from this proposal. Does this mean the Commission should propose a second, perhaps broader reform of the power market that includes capacity mechanisms and other more structural elements next year? I'm going to just take a yes or no question from you all. Manuel? Should there be a second proposal next year?
There is room for improving the current one, for working on the technical details, so it should not be necessary a second one. We should work on the current one, improving it.
So is that a yes for next year?
Yeah, for this year.
For this
for the coming weeks and months.
Morten, yes or no?
Victor, sorry, it's not because we lack issues to discuss or to negotiate in this proposal exactly, but I think what is so difficult about this topic is obviously we're talking about energy systems and everything is interrelated. So to the extent that we're not addressing or having the full picture, for sure we should leave room for adding, but it could also be something to consider for the next mandate. So it's difficult to say yes or no to this question. Sorry, Victor.
Well, so I'm going to have to insist on a yes or no. That tilts towards a yes for me. Is that right?
It's too difficult to say, but slightly yes. Slightly.
Okay. Katerina, perhaps trickiest for you, but I'm going to have to insist on a yes or no. Should the Commission bring in a second proposal next year?
Thanks. Well, first I would say that we need to understand whether there is a problem. And I'm not convinced that there is a problem on the capacity mechanisms as they are defined in law today. I said that there is an issue with the process and we will deal with that, but that doesn't require legal changes. So I think before somebody convinces me that there is a problem, I think until then my answer is more on the no side.
Interesting, great. And Leonardo, yes or no?
Well, yes, because I think the problem might be different national implementations, but I'm not sure. So I agree with Katarina that we might have a more voluntary, harmonized approach. But if we look back to history, we don't really do that voluntarily, right? To fully harmonize and integrate. So history suggests that we might need to reform with additional steps.
Great. So, and just very last question before we wrap up. Katerina, I just want to end with you. Sort of hot off the press, we've heard yesterday a plan from coming from Greece, actually, that says that the Commission estimates that 584 billion euros of investment in the electricity grid will be required until 2030. So the proposal doesn't deal much with this, as we've kind of touched on before, and the Greeks plan to propose calling for the creation of a bespoke European grid facility, a centralized facility streamlining funding from the EIB and the connecting facility and others. Is this something that the Commission should consider proposing?
Thanks. I mean, we certainly do agree, and we discussed it already today in this panel, that the grid investments will be crucial for the decarbonization, for integration of renewables, for secure supply, and all the rest. For the cross-border investments, trans-European networks, we already do have a policy framework where member states cooperate together with all the transmission system operators, etc., and supported by the Connecting Europe facility with something like 6 billion over the multi-annual financial perspective. Investment needs are huge in the transmission side, but they are even bigger on the local level in the distribution grids, where 80% of all future renewables will be connected. They are typically, when financing comes to it, financial public support, I mean, covered by all the regional funds today, the recovery funds and all these. So, and that's where the big need is, and that's where we are working very hard with member states also to make sure that the investments happen. So what I would conclude by saying that we absolutely need to put more emphasis on the grids. They are typically paid by tariffs, but we also need to see that there is then, when tariffs risks going too high, that there can be public support to those. So that will be the key element for the next Commission, next financial perspectives to deal with.
But to be clear then, so you're open to the creation of a European grid facility?
We are open to look at all good ideas, and then we do the assessment and make a proposal.
And is this a good idea?
I leave that for the assessment.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I just want to give you everyone about 30 seconds to wrap up. I just wanted to say, if you have one take-home message that you'd like the audience to bring home with them to digest from today, what would that be? I'll start with Nicola.
Well, thanks. I think what is important is that we are still in a crisis mode, and we need to work together quickly to adopt new measures. But we also need to make it consciously. So let's look at all the unintended consequences and let's try to address them together. Great. Manuel?
Yeah, I would say that we have a good starting point. We have political agreement mandate to reach a good reform before within this mandate of the European Union before May next year. There are some technical aspects where we need to improve, but I think we have the willingness and we have the diagnosis and we have the tools to do that in the coming weeks. And also Spain will hold the presidency of the European Union in the second semester, and of course we will push for it, and we will appreciate also the work coming from the political parties and the parliament.
Morten?
so that we get it right in terms of incentivizing investments and further ramp up of renewables, integrating this in our energy system. So having this, say, investor's perspective and predictability is important for me.
Great. Katarina?
Thanks. I leave very confident after this discussion this morning, and I think it confirms my earlier intuition or feeling already that there is a lot of convergence and there's a lot of possibilities to have a rapid agreement between the co-legislators, and by working together we can facilitate all that even more. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Leonardo, finally.
Well, I think we should be happy. We have a electricity market that is unique in the world. We started to doubt it, but we have regained confidence, and we have identified a few instruments that we think can help and complete these markets. So we're not going a step back, we're going a step forward, and we should never expect a proposal to be the final proposal. I've heard this too many times before. Electricity markets move, the system moves. So, you know, it's almost natural that next steps need to be taken. And if it's not next year, it will be the year after. As Katarina said, as soon as we notice that the problems need to be addressed. But I don't think we can expect any proposal to address all problems between now and 2050. That would be unrealistic.
Fair enough. Thank you for your comment. Great. So I'd like to thank the speakers for joining us online today. And thank you very much to our audience as well for your interest. Thank you to our partner Ørsted for making this event possible. Please send your feedback to live@politico.eu. Check our website for events updates. We have great events coming up, including Sustainable Future Week, which takes place on November 14th to 16th. Thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye. Thank you.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.